Mission meeting for tonight to order. The first order of business, I'd like everybody to ask everybody to stand and recite the Pledge of Allegiance with me. The flag is over here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And roll call, please.
Good evening, members. Chair Wolf.
Here.
Vice Chair List.
Here.
Member Lowry.
Here.
Member Roby.
Here.
Member Friend.
And thank you. And our first order of business is to consider the consent calendar, which includes the agenda and the minutes of last week.
Before we move forward, in light of the anticipated dispatchment that I think this body will have regarding item 7 on tonight's agenda, staff would request that we flip the order of the agenda and hear item 7 first.
Oh.
And then the public hearing would come later.
Okay.
That would require a motion in a second.
It doesn't?
It does.
It does. Okay. Then in accordance with the request of staff, I move that we reverse the order of the public hearing for the zone change item and new business, and we'll consider the site plan review first under the category of new business.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. So, do we have a motion on the consent calendar or any discussion?
Move that we accept the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, we have a motion on the floor to accept the consent calendar. Signify by saying aye, your approval.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Now we move to the item of the moment in the evening where we consider items of interest to the public, or the public comment section. This is to discuss any items that are not on the agenda tonight. That's the operative word, not on tonight's agenda, and we can hear whatever your comments are, but we can't take any action. So if is there anybody who'd like to avail themselves of the public comment portion tonight? Don't be bashful. Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on, and so the first thing we'll do is we'll take up the new business, which is the site plan review for 225 Placerville Drive, the Sierra Central Credit Union. So I assume we have a staff report, please?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chairman. This request is from the Sierra Central Credit Union. They're requesting final approval of the landscaping and irrigation plans for the new 4,000 square foot financial service building that is to be built at 225 Placerville Drive. That was conditionally approved by this body, the Planning Commission, on March 3rd, 2015, under Site Plan Review 2014-06. Should the final landscaping and irrigation plans for the project be approved by the Commission, it would complete the requirements of condition number 35. Proposed planting and irrigation plans were provided to you as Exhibit A of the staff report. For context, also in that staff report is Exhibit B, which provides you a copy of the approved elevations for the structure. These elevations meet condition number 40, once again, of the approved Site Plan Review 2014-06. The Commission should be aware, and I will make you aware tonight, that post-approval of Site Plan Review 2014-06, the applicant's representatives informed staff of their intention to not construct a freestanding ground sign or landscaping within the city's right-of-way along Placerville Drive. This area is adjacent to and southeasterly of the site, bordered by Placerville Drive to the southeast, Green Valley Road to the southwest, and Easy Street to the west. This is shown on as Exhibit C in staff's report. Proposed landscaping tonight before you would be located entirely within the Sierra Central Credit Union property. Staff analyzed the request for compliance and consistency with the city's site plan review criteria, the city's development guide, including landscaping visual interest, tree planting, plant variety, plant screening, water conservation and maintenance. And this analysis was provided on pages 1 through 4 of the staff report. Proposed landscaping and irrigation meets all relevant city code criteria and city guidelines. Staff therefore recommends that the commission move the adoption of the landscape and irrigation plans, once again for Site Plan Review 2014-06, the Sierra Central Credit Union project, by making the finding on page 5 of staff's report. Mr. Chairman, a representative for the Sierra Central Credit Union is in the audience this evening, Mrs. McDonald. She can answer any questions you may have about the landscape plan.
Thank you. Before we do that, are there any questions of staff from the commission? All right, so we'll open the public comment section on this item, and it'd be a good time to hear from the applicant. Or not. Oh, okay. Okay, great. Does the commission have any questions? Sorry.
No, I do not.
He was yelling at me. You have deniability. Okay, it doesn't look like we have any questions, so thank you. Is there anybody else that would like to address this item tonight? All right, seeing no takers, we'll close the public hearing part on this item and bring it back to the commission. Is there any further discussion or questions for staff or anything? Somebody ready to make a motion? Or I can. Okay, I'll make a motion that we, on page 5 for staff, that we find the request is consistent with the zoning ordinance and the development guide as analyzed in staff's September 1, 2015 report, and we approve the landscape and irrigation plans for the project as submitted.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? All right, let's have a roll call vote, please.
Chair Wolf,
Aye.
Member Roby,
Aye.
Vice Chair List,
Aye.
Member Lowry.
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, motion carries. Sometimes it's good to not talk. Okay, we'll move on to the public hearing that we're having tonight, and I suspect there's a few people kind of on both sides of this issue here tonight. This should be kind of interesting. We're going to have the public hearing, but before we open the public hearing, I want to kind of abuse my position as the chairman of the Planning Commission, and and just comment that while we do, it's serious business for us to help the City Council enforce the zoning ordinance. Sometimes we have to be reminded to not take ourselves too seriously. So in that regard, I've brought one of the stakeholders in tonight's project here. He wants to say hi. Okay, so this is really a historic moment for us to. It's kind of neat to be able to look at, even though we all kind of don't necessarily respond well to additional regulation. This is kind of an interesting one. So we look forward to a spirited discussion and hear all the issues on this issue. So we'll open the public hearing on the zone change, which we're conducting this public hearing in order to consider and make a recommendation to the City Council regarding proposed text amendments to the city's zoning code, allowing the keeping of up to 4 hen chickens in residential zones with the city of Placerville. So having said that, we'll move on to the staff report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. Let me start by just giving a brief history as to why we're here, why the city staff is bringing this forward to the commission and eventually for consideration by the council. Basically, as most of us are probably aware, I know I'm personally aware where I have a house, and is that there's a lot of chicken keeping currently existing in the city. We've received requests about legalizing the keeping of chickens in the city. Currently, keeping of chickens is allowed within 2 particular zone districts. A lot of people don't know this. So again, this particular code is looking at allowing the keeping of chickens on single-family residentially zoned parcels. So that will affect 3 particular zones. Those are the R1 zones. We have R1 6,000, R1 10,000, and R1 20,000. Those numbers meaning the minimum square footage of the particular lot. So it only affects those 3 zones. Currently, those single-family residential zones do not permit the keeping of chickens, even though I personally know of quite a few that have chickens. Staff has received complaints from time to time regarding the chickens. Typically, it's a noise complaint because they have roosters. This particular code is not looking at allowing roosters, but only allowing the keeping of hen chickens, and only up to 4. Staff felt that 4 was a good number. I think many of us would agree that 4 dogs is much greater of a nuisance than 4 chickens would be. 16. So basically, I want to talk about the 2 zones that do allow chickens. The first one is the RE, the estate residential zone. It allows agricultural uses. So if somebody happens to be in an estate residential zone, which you're looking at your large lots, I think it's typically, maybe Mr. Painter can chime in, but I believe it's a 5-acre minimum parcel size.
RE is
for the
5
RE.
acres, yes.
So on 5 acres, you're allowed agricultural uses. That's raising and grazing of livestock, poultry, other animals, crops. You can have horses, you can have cattle. You can't create a nuisance, of course. You got to engage in sound animal husbandry, but you're also allowed to sell your agricultural products from that site. So we do have that in the city currently. And then we have a smaller single-family residential zone. That's the R1A, which is your 1 acre minimum parcel size single-family residential zone. That zone allows for the raising of crops and fruits and the keeping of animals in a controlled manner. Does allow up to 2 hooved animals. You can have horses, cows, not for sale, not for hire, but you are allowed to keep them on that R1A zone. So again, I just go over that because a lot of people that I've spoken with and the commission as well may not be aware that we have 2 existing residential zones in the city that does allow for 1, agricultural uses, and then 2, for the keeping and raising of crops and animals. So this particular ordinance is only looking at chickens. And there's chickens have been in the news quite over the last few years. I don't know if it's because of the economy or the price of eggs, but we found in our research that there's a large number of cities now in California that do allow for the keeping of chickens. And we really focused on a few of those. We looked at the cities of Benicia, Chico, Davis, Fremont, Sacramento, San Luis Obispo, San Francisco, and Woodland. So from one end of the spectrum, you've got the city of Sacramento that is very, very restrictive. You got to go through a lot of hoops. You got to have a permit. Each chicken has to be banded. A lot of different things. They pay an annual fee. And at the other end of the spectrum, there are many jurisdictions. It's just they have what we would call performance standards, and that's sort of what staff is recommending here. And I can quickly go over some of those, but therein, if you look at your Exhibit A, the proposed ordinance, we have a Section D, Development Standards, and that's where we really want to focus on the keeping of chickens, how they'll be kept, the requirements for keeping a chicken coop, and it must be of sound structure, the setbacks, all chicken manure and skins and feathers and detritus must be removed. All those kinds of things are kept in there, and hopefully you had a chance to read those, and we can discuss those further as we move along. But again, we glean those requirements from a lot of the different other cities that are allowing the keeping of chickens in single-family residential zones. We did advertise this. We only received one written comment, and we did include that in your staff report. It was via email. The person did request to be anonymous, so we blotted out who sent the email, but basically this individual had a bad experience with chickens that were being kept on a neighboring property. So hopefully you had a chance to read that and consider those, and hopefully you can see how at least what we're trying to do is fashion the reduction or elimination of nuisances due to bad animal husbandry or keeping too many chickens or having roosters, which we're looking at not allowing. We do have a safety valve should somebody, say for example, somebody's in an R1 6,000 lot, but they're on 3-4 acres. You know, the lot could be subdivided, but who knows when it's going to be subdivided, and there's a single family house on there. You would think they could raise and keep animals like somebody in an R1A that has 1 acre. So we do have a provision where if they're in one of those 3 zones, they could then come and apply for conditional use permit to apply for maybe keeping more chickens or doing something different contrary to the development standards we have in the code. So they have that ability then to make an application to staff. We would then come to the Planning Commission for review and either approval, denial, or modification of that permit. So with that, I don't really think I have anything more to add. Staff would recommend then that what you would do at this point is feel free to ask staff any clarifications or questions on the code, and we can answer those, and then open it up to public hearing. I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of different comments for the keeping of chickens and against the keeping of chickens, and then close the public hearing, bring it back, fully deliberate. You're in no rush. It would be staff's feeling that you would want to, after considering public comment, give this back to staff so that we can then consider your direction, maybe make some changes in the draft ordinance, come back to you at a follow-up meeting, and then you can finalize your recommendation to the council. So with that, I'll conclude my staff report, and staff is open for any questions you may have.
All right, thank you. Excellent report as usual. I have a couple of questions. One is about and I will quote somebody that I spoke to about this yesterday. Now I got to get a permit to have a chicken. So can you talk about whether or not permit is required?
Sure. As I spoke earlier, we looked at many different cities, and some cities do require permits, and there were a number of cities of comparable size, in fact a lot much larger than Placerville, that do not require a permit. So what we did is we tried to make it as simple as possible for the person wishing to keep them. So we limited it to only 4 chickens, four hen chickens, no roosters. And then we have a list of different standards that must be met. Yeah, a brood, as we would call it then, a brood of 4 and no more. And there would be no permit required. It'd be like somebody having 4 dogs or 4 cats, or, which is of course allowed by right until it becomes a nuisance, and then they would call us, and then we would do an inspection and to ensure that they're in keeping with the spirit of the ordinance.
Thank you. And I guess it would probably make some sense to elaborate for the public and the viewing audience a bit the setback requirements.
Yes, I'm glad you asked that, because I will read what's proposed. Basically, that would be, and I apologize, under development standards, I switched from numerical to letters back to numerical. I didn't catch that, but I would say going down to item number, or letter E, small e under D, enclosure shall maintain at least 20 feet from any dwelling unit on an adjacent parcel. Any enclosure shall be restricted to either rear or side yard. So basically what that's saying is we're not imposing a restriction on distance from a chicken coop from the dwelling unit on the parcel that's going to be keeping the chickens, but at least 20 feet from the adjoining parcel. One thing that staff would like to add when we come back with a final ordinance is that any chicken coop would maintain the appropriate yard setback, whichever is greater. So it must be either 20 feet from the house or maintaining the yard setback, whichever is greater.
When you say 20 feet from the house, you're talking about an adjacent.
An adjacent
dwelling.
house, so your neighbor's house. Because we do, again, we're an old city, we're well aware that some houses are straddling a property line. So we don't want to be in a situation then where, we want to make sure that they're 20 feet away from that house, even though their setback on a side yard may be only 10 feet. We could have a situation where the house is set back 30 feet from the property line. So we don't want somebody coming then and thinking that, oh, well, I can put my chicken coop right on the property line. We would want them to maintain the appropriate setback for the yard. And we are allowing the chicken enclosures within rear and side yard. We thought about that. Some cities only allowed it in the rear yard. And then there were some that allowed it both, but no jurisdiction that we reviewed allowed them in the front yard.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of staff before we open the public hearing?
I have a couple. First of all, I'll qualify. One of our daughters did 4-H poultry, so at one time we had 6 hens and 2 roosters behind our house. We lived on an acre and a half, didn't really bother the neighbors. But I want it made clear that I don't dislike chickens. Okay. Really, I have no axe to grind with chickens per se, but what we're about here is decriminalizing chickens. And the things that concern me, it's a lot like the situation to me where we're decriminalizing pot in the state, but it's at the same time it's true that there are these huge grows in Humboldt and other counties up north, which would all qualify as EPA Superfund sites. My point being is that we're at a point where we want to relax the restrictions to make it legal to have some number of chickens, but I see absolutely no evidence that the city has gotten its arms around the criminal chickens, if you will. Nothing's been done about that. And I realize the history has been an observe and report thing, and not many have been reported. That may be fine if the number is insignificant and it's just it's less than 99 chickens in the whole town. Maybe that's one thing. But once raising chickens in the town is permitted, it has to be regulated. Okay, to me, that implies some number of hours expended by a code enforcement officer looking around and asking around about chicken problems and not waiting for it to rise to a level where somebody's ready to file a criminal complaint. The other thing I am absolutely hard over on in this post-Prop 13 world is all of these initiatives, I believe, must be revenue neutral to the city. So I don't think it's unreasonable to ask those who want to keep chickens in town to pay some of the freight for the management and regulation of all the chickens in town. It's the case with many other services we get from the city. We mentioned dogs, you have to buy a dog license in this town. So in a nutshell, for me, it's about proper regulation. Do we really have enough part-time or full-time equivalents in code enforcement officers to make sure the chickens on both sides of the legal fence are properly managed? And if not, what are those remedies? I mean, I don't see any mention of remedies in here. First, second, third violation, fines, what have you. And if you don't, if you don't have remedies, you really don't have anything. That's all I got.
I'd like to interject just with just to remind everybody that this is really the appropriate time to ask questions of staff. Later on in the hearing is probably a better time for our opinions. So I would just kind of remind the rest of the commission of that. Thank you.
Getting back to the development standards D, I had a couple quick questions. Subsection A, it says any enclosure or other accessory structure exceeding 120 feet shall not be constructed without first obtaining a building permit. My question is, there is mention about water down here, I think in subsection G. There may be an issue of power, at least, 120 volt for lights during, particularly cold times of the year. My question being, if someone does choose to run power and or water to that structure of 120 square feet or less, will that require a permit?
Yes, it would.
Okay.
Yes, the construction, any development of a structure does invoke the Uniform Building Code, and so we just want to remind people that if they build a chicken coop greater than 120 square feet, well, then it does trigger the need for a building
Regardless
permit.
of power or
regardless.
water.
Anytime you're going to run water or run power to a structure, that also then requires a building permit.
Okay. Going down to subsection E, it says 20 feet from any dwelling unit on an adjacent parcel. I know you went into a little bit of detail of how that's interpreted. So, to my understanding, if there is a dwelling, let's say exactly 20 feet from that property line, then that chicken coop or structure could conceivably be right up to that property line. No, is that, I see.
No, and that's what I mentioned earlier. That's something that was brought to our attention following development of our draft ordinance to make it clear that these development standards in this proposed keeping of chickens ordinance does not supersede the zone district yards, required yards, and so they would somebody building a chicken coop would have to maintain the setbacks from the rear and the side yards, and so we would propose, if we come back, we would put in something to the effect that they would also maintain the required yard setbacks, whichever is greater. So if the 20 feet from an adjoining dwelling unit is a greater distance from the property line than the setback, then they would have to maintain the 20 foot.
Okay. I think that was both of my questions. Thank you.
I too am concerned about enforcement. I think just like you said with our dogs, if we have a dog, we have to get a license to do that, and I don't see that here, and I think that needs to be considered. The other thing that that I think I would like to see or have an answer to is the structure, no matter if it's 3 foot by 3 foot or whatever, that it's more than just 4 pieces of OSB thrown together with a piece of tin on top and called a coop. That there needs to be some standards set, even down to that size of 3 by 3, where it fits into the community and isn't an eyesore. I'll be sharing a picture or some pictures with the this up here on what I live next door to, and I'm not excited about it. The other thing is, through any of this, was anything said about side yards and some kind of blockage so it cannot be seen from public right-of-ways?
No.
Okay.
If you're on a public right-of-way and you can look into the side yard, they would be permitted to have a chicken coop. It wouldn't be able to be in the front yard, of course, but it could be in the side yard and could very well be visible in some circumstances.
Okay.
I have a couple questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. First of all, I apologize for being late. Second, I'd like to suggest that as a matter of protocol, anyone who is talking on this matter has to hold the chicken at the time they're speaking. My name is Michael Friend. I am pro-chicken. I have a couple of direct questions for staff. Thank you. So on development standards, 2A, we talk about a structure not exceeding 120 square feet. So can I just ask staff where that came from? Am I concerned with permitting a structure up? Actually, technically, they can have a structure larger than that if they get a permit, and I'm concerned that that flexibility is conducive to more than 4 chickens. And so, first of all, I am kind of caught like some of the other commissioners were between asking direct questions of staff without offering an opinion. So I would like to know from you, Pierre and Andrew, where the 120 came from, and staff's thought about allowing a larger structure with a permit, and is that really where we'd want to go with this?
The 120 square feet is out of the Uniform Building Code, so that's required under the state building code.
So anything larger than that
Anything
has to be
larger
permitted?
than that
Okay.
requires a permit, regardless. If you want to
Okay.
build a shed, 125 square feet, it requires a building permit. So we just put that in there so that somebody doesn't want to build a larger chicken coop. And sometimes they're larger because maybe only half the chicken coop is going to be where the chickens reside and sleep overnight, and the other half is where they store the grain, the feed, the water barrels, and what have you. It's a shed, and then another half of the shed is a chicken coop. Those things exist, and so that's why we put that in there.
Okay. I'm actually going to hold my other comments until after public hearing, because I think it's going to get into deliberations with commissioners. And the only thing I'm going to offer to my fellow commissioners is that I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we have the authority to craft this ordinance, assuming we're going to approve it. We can deny it, of course, but if we were to approve it, we can craft it with the protections or conditions that we think are appropriate to balance free use of property, both by chicken owners and non-chicken owners, right, by adjacent properties. That's really what our authority is this evening. Is that correct?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd phrase it just a little bit differently. What you have before you is just a first draft from
Sure.
staff, and so any future drafts we will bring back to you with an underlying strikeout version that would then show changes made by staff to reflect your direction the next time we come back. So what you're doing is you're not recommending approval per se or denial per se. What you're doing is, it's not to say that if the commission, if you had a majority of the commission that felt that chickens are inappropriate, you can certainly make a recommendation that we do not have an ordinance, and we would then carry that forward to the council. The council would then ultimately decide on whether or not to allow chickens, or
Okay.
maybe under different circumstances. So what you're doing then is making a recommendation to the city council. The council will eventually consider the code as recommended by the commission.
All right, thank you. So I have one specific question. I do not understand in condition 8 or item 8 under the development standards, no hen chickens shall be slaughtered on any developed lot used exclusively for residential purposes. I don't understand what that means.
It means that if somebody has a chicken and they decide that maybe instead of going to the store and buying a chicken that's packaged or already cooked, like you can get at Rayleigh's, that they would slaughter the chicken and pluck it and cook it. So I would say the majority of ordinances that we saw, they don't allow the slaughtering. And so the only district that would allow that I could see currently in the code would be your RE zone, where agricultural uses are allowed. So of course you can slaughter and do those other more agricultural uses, but this is a single-family residential zone, and it's not appropriate. At least staff feels that it's not appropriate to conduct slaughtering of your animals on that property.
Okay, so, and we can talk about this later, but maybe we may want to reword this. So we're basically saying this ordinance does not permit the slaughter of chickens on whatever zoning we're talking about within the city limits. Because I don't necessarily read it that way. It was confusing to me. That's why I asked the question. But I appreciate the explanation because I understand that. But I'm not sure that communicates exactly what you just described as it means.
Slaughtering is, yeah, basically that's
Okay.
saying slaughtering is not permitted.
And chickens includes both hens and roosters, so this ordinance would include roosters?
No, and I would refer you to.
Did I miss that?
First of all, section, under the keeping of chickens.
Hen
we have
chickens.
The purpose statement, it's the keeping of hen chickens.
And you wouldn't oppose if we added roosters are not permitted, just for clarification?
I thought we had put that in there. Let me see if I can.
I missed it then.
Find it.
It's called a roster? That's why I missed it.
Okay,
I have no other.
under section B, which is general.
Oh.
And that's a general statement.
Oh, there it is.
It is
I'm sorry, I
unlawful
missed
to
it.
keep, possess, or maintain chickens on any parcel of property located in the city, except in accordance with the regulations, standards, and restrictions proscribed in this section. Roosters are not permitted on any developed lot used exclusively for residential purposes unless subject to the exemptions under subsection E or as permitted by conditional use permitted or subsection G. So we had E in there again because RE and the R1A are single-family residential zones,
Right.
which they can have roosters in those two zoned
Correct.
properties.
Okay. Thank you. I did miss that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Two more. One quick comment and maybe one not so quick comment. Section D, subsection 8, says all chicken feed shall be secured and stored in airtight containers, et cetera, et cetera. Is there a possibility that we require the securing of the feed, et cetera, inside the coop? Because I don't have any chickens in my neighborhood, but I do have some wily animals that could make short work of any sort of quote-unquote airtight container, whether it's a screw-on lid, a Rubbermaid, a concrete bunker with a 80-pound lid, they're going to get into it. So my question is, or comment is, that may be something that we could add to that. And I don't raise chickens, so I don't know how practical that would be. You know, if you stand up and say, no, nobody does that, that's not going to happen, that's one thing. Or is that something that we can add? Just a comment. The other one that kind of popped into my head was if a landowner, a homeowner in a historical district were to construct that 120 square foot structure, or decided to either run power and or water and or construct a larger structure, do we open, no pun intended, another can of worms with that historical district architecture issue?
To answer your first question regarding the storage of feed, the purpose of that airtight container is to make sure that it doesn't create any kind of a rodent problem or a problem of, wild animals coming in, because we all know we have raccoons and skunks and other animals that come onto our properties. But that's, staff doesn't purport to be an expert on the keeping of chickens. We've done a lot of research over the last several months, mainly looking at other ordinances. If you look on the website, there's just an enormous amount of information regarding chickens. You can buy chicken coops that are ready-made at almost any size. So that's up to the commission to determine whether or not you feel it's appropriate then to require that all feed be stored in a shed or indoors. Sounds good to me, but I'll leave that to the five of you to give direction to us, and then we can propose that in the code. As for the historic district, that's a good question. Staff, I don't know if we're going to really see chicken coops larger than 120 square feet, unless you're looking at having far more than 4 chickens. So we don't really see it, and any more than 4 chickens is going to require a conditional use permit, where that would open up then purview of all the aspects of the keeping of those chickens. So I don't know if that's looking at maybe a future problem that really will not exist. I don't know. We can certainly debate it more, but from staff's perspective, off the cuff, I don't see anybody having a chicken coop of a greater than 124 square feet for 4 chickens, unless, like I say, it's a shed, which, you know, they're allowed to build anyway, if it's larger with a building permit. So that's about the best I can do, but we can certainly discuss or maybe research more about that. Or you can certainly create a threshold where maybe if they're going to build a structure that has chickens in it, and it's greater than 120 feet, that triggers a conditional use permit.
All right, thank you. That was kind of a rhetorical question, but it did kind of answer it. And yeah, I agree. It's something to address maybe down the line. Thank you.
Because if I may just add, you know, we did add that section G that says any person seeking to deviate from the regulations and standards set forth in this section may only engage in the keeping of chickens upon approval of a conditional use permit. There were a number of ordinances in other cities that did have a maximum chicken coop size, a minimum and a maximum. Some had it as small as 15 square feet. We kept it at 25 square feet, can't be smaller. But we didn't have a size maximum. You can certainly request that we consider a size maximum, and therefore if somebody wanted to have a chicken coop greater than 120 square feet, there, you have a conditional use permit, it'll come before you.
So, sorry, I thought of one other item I wanted to ask staff directly, and I do concur with the comments that were made previously regarding permits, inspections, and penalties. So my question to staff is, if we were going to suggest or require permits, and we were going to require penalties for violations, how would we set the dollar amounts? Is that something that is done administratively, or there's some automatic chart? Or could we just come up with a dollar amount that says the penalty for violation, for having more than 4 chickens, or for violating other conditions, you know, the penalty is this? I mean, how would we do that?
So let me start, Mr. Chairman, if I may, to answer the commissioner's question. There were 2 other commissioners that also spoke with enforcement, and there was a request that maybe a code enforcement officer go around. Currently we are complaint driven, so staff essentially, when we drive around town, we have blinders on. So, you know, myself, Mr. Painter, other staff, unless we see something that's egregious or something where it's going to be a health and safety issue, could cause harm to individuals, you know, we don't really see it. We're too busy. We get plenty of citizen complaints that we're dealing with, and we have quite a number of those. And so chickens would be the same, and that's how we're handling them currently. You know, there's a number of different, I walk all around town, I hear chickens all day long everywhere I go. So they're out there, but we don't really get a lot of complaints. Typically they're roosters and noise generated, as I said earlier. So when we get a complaint, a noise complaint or something about chickens, well, then they're in violation, and we have enforced and caused people to remove their chickens. But unless somebody complains about the chickens next door, we're not going to enforce on that. It's up to the neighbors to, you know, where those chickens rise is some annoyance that they call us, and then we go out and we start a code enforcement. You do not have to list penalties and fines and everything in this section of the code. It's all part of the zoning ordinance. Violation of the zoning ordinance could be anywhere from an infraction to a misdemeanor. That's all contained in Title I, which is the administrative section of the city code. And then under Chapter 4, you have the penalties and the enforcement. I mean, we could go so far as fining the person $500 a day. You know, typically it's $100 a day, but depending upon the egregiousness or how foul the situation is, you know, we could charge them more than that per the code. It's all in another section of the city code, and then we can certainly bill them for the enforcement costs, and we can put a lien on their property if they refuse to pay. So there's all those different avenues for the city to enforce the zoning code. So when you look through our zoning ordinance, all the different sections where uses are allowed by right or allowed by conditional use permit, people violate the code all the time. They're doing uses, they're putting up signs. It's all goes back to the administrative section of the city code where we enforce. We don't have to have specific enforcement sections for each section of the code. So if it's helpful, we can certainly make copies of those penalty sections and the enforcement sections for you if that's helpful. Or what I would encourage you is just, you all should have copies of the code, or you can easily go online and you can look at Title I administration, and then it's Chapter 4, and there's Chapter 4, a 4A and a 4B. All those chapters outline all the procedures that the city staff has to do in order to provide the alleged violator with due process.
So I've got a couple
Thank you,
more
that's helpful.
questions. So what I'm hearing is that the remedies exist, they just live elsewhere in code.
Yes.
Okay. And the enforcement posture has been and will be such that there's probably no real impact on city resources, is what I'm hearing you say.
And, you know, staff is making an assumption. Staff does, I mean, you may believe differently. Staff does not believe that we're creating an ordinance to allow for the keeping of up to 4 chickens, that you allow it in the code, they will come. I think people that want to have chickens have them. That we have gotten a few inquiries over the past few years. Maybe Mr. Painter can, maybe it's a lot more than I'm aware of, where we tell them they're not allowed, and then they go away, or they decide to have chickens anyway.
Right.
But I don't see a big change in the landscape out there because we have this code. I think what this code is for people that really they don't want to violate the code, and they brought it to our attention that there's a lot of cities out there and counties out there that now allow the keeping of chickens on single family lots. And so this is a response to that. This isn't something that the city has to do. So I would say this is more being generated from the public. And so staff went to the council. We asked the council to approve what's called a resolution of intention to amend the zoning code, and that's required. They could have done it by minute order, but we did a resolution of intention, sort of spelling the reasons, the whereases, why we're coming before you for this. But it's a citizen generated, and so, you know, you're going to hear people that like them and people that don't, and so this is where we're at.
Thank you. Those answers have helped me to adjust my opinions, but I will obey sharing those until the appropriate time.
Wanting to proceed quickly, I do have one question. We have an item in here that said we had 4 complaints since 2009. Do we have any ballpark fuzzy idea of how many requests or how many positive instances of positive input for chickens? How many? We have 4 documented cases of anti-chicken correspondence. Do we have any idea? I mean, other than the public presence today, I mean, at one point didn't we say, yeah, this is an issue because we've had so many people request that? Any idea? If not, then
I'm thinking since becoming a staff person with the city, I believe I've had maybe 3 or 4 requests for chickens. Had 1 complaint, recent, and you'll hear more tonight.
okay.
So, again, it's not a lot. The numbers are small, and that's why staff is not seeing a huge impact on staffing above and beyond what we already have with people having chickens, which we don't deal with unless there's a complaint.
Thank you.
All right. There's a lot of things to think about. Now we'll move on to the public hearing or the public comment section on this item. We would ask you that for the record, if you come up, just state your name and whether or not you live in the city. And then there's 15 people in here. If everybody takes a half hour to tell us the same thing, we'll be here till Thursday. So I guarantee you we'll get it if 10 of you have the same opinion. You don't need to repeat everything. It just becomes excruciating for us and for you guys. So just summarize if you agree with somebody. And with that, we'll move on, and we just kind of do this as a free-for-all. Be polite to one another, but please come up to the podium and state your name and where you're from. So, who'd like to go first?
Hi. Sue Cooper, and I live here in town. I kind of got the egg rolling, as it were, with this issue, since we're on to chicken puns, so I like it. We had a couple of hens. We did some research online. Quick backstory. It said there's this website, Backyard Chickens, that actually says erroneously that you can have chickens in El Dorado County. We weren't looking at distinguishing El Dorado County from the city of Placerville, blah, blah, blah. We got chickens, we got 2, and then we got another 2, so we had a total of 4. Our neighbor complained about noise and smell, I believe, so we had to rehome them. They were our pets. We really liked them. They were funny. They were part of our family, and it was kind of sad. So we came here or to the council to say, hey, is there any way, because it's such an ag rural place, we're like, there's no way, and there's no way that Placerville you can have chickens. It was really surprising to us. So we came to the council and then started working with Pierre. I started emailing him, hounding him. Pierre, what about the chickens? And so here we're at, and so I just would like to voice my support. I'd like to have chickens in a responsible way. I'm not trying to offend the neighbor. I'm just trying to have hens in a responsible way. So that's it.
Mr. Chairman, will you permit any questions of commissioners to?
Yeah, let's just kind of keep it brief, but yeah, I think we need to do that.
I assume, Ms. Cooper, that you're pro-coop.
I am.
So very quickly, you raised the issue of the complaint, and they said it was a complaint of noise and smell.
Yep.
You had roosters? No roosters?
No.
And was there actually any noise?
I see our neighbor in the audience, so this will be interesting.
Okay.
There's noise when one lays an egg and the other one gets all like,
Okay.
diva. There's some, bam, bam.
Sure.
So, there's
And
small
I'll ask one
noise.
more question, and I promise I'll yield. Roosters typically start very early in the morning, and that's
Yes.
why we don't allow the rooster. I'm glad to see. So, but when egg laying is typically real early in the morning also?
No.
Okay.
Not.
I'll take you at your word. I don't know
Yeah.
this discipline that well, so
Yeah.
thank you so
yeah.
much.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Karen Ray, and I live off of Woodpecker Court and am their neighbor, so I'm the wicked reportee or reporter. I'm here to request that you keep the no chicken in the city limits of Placerville as it is. We're a small town. We're surrounded by agricultural area. It's easily accessible to sustainable foods. Properties, for the most part, are neither even, fenced, or level. In my case, it's less than a half acre. Theirs is just about an acre. I'm concerned with who would resolve issues. In this case, the city resolved my issue. As you heard, they gave away their chickens or rehomed them, as she said. However, that doesn't keep them from screaming at me about what a wicked, awful, horrible neighbor I am for making them get rid of their chickens. And I'm a little worried about the draft proposal. I mean, in the city itself, we have domestic animals. We have trouble with our domestic animals. I've called, the neighbors actually called 911 because my daughter and I were trapped on our car top while the neighbors' pit bulls were loose trying to attack us. I've had the screen door ripped off by the neighbors' pit bulls. We have cats all over I may be allergic to them. I may now, when I go outside, have to use an antihistamine. We have feral cats. I don't know if they're either feral or domestic. They come and go. It's been really good lately, but I see a couple are back. We have wild animals. We have squirrels, skunks, raccoons, bobcats, red and gray foxes, and in my 30 years, one bear. The agricultural chickens, as you heard her say, will not be owned by farm owners. They'll be owned by families who will love their chickens. And so if there is a problem, I become the wicked neighbor. Just as you become the wicked neighbor for people who have Rottweilers that lunge at the fence and threaten to eat you. They think their dogs are wonderful. I'm terrified that I'm going to be the next article about the woman that was eaten, like the woman in San Francisco. I mean, it's a matter of relativity. I've had 2 neighbors with chickens that I'm really aware of, one down below me. I had little impact from her chickens, but she gave her chickens away finally because they were eaten by animals, and she finally gave up. These people had their chickens out in front of their house, which was fine. I didn't even know their chickens were there.
Can I interrupt you just for a moment? We
Yes.
want to hear your opinion, but this is not really the place. Please be quiet. Please. You don't have the floor.
Okay.
We just need to, we need to hear your opinions about the ordinance at hand. This is not
Okay.
the proper place for you guys to throw rocks at each other. So let's please confine ourselves to the issue.
Okay. The issue was that the chicken coop rested at a point on their property that is on a bank, which puts it a very short distance from my house as that rubber chicken would fly. If I can hear the sound from the freeway, the raceway, the football field, the marching band, the neighbors in their house, why am I not going to hear their chickens that are a whole backyard closer to me, and even with my bedroom windows? Then when they go off at 4:20 in the morning, it sounded like they're in my bedroom. They didn't go off every night at 4:20, but they do go off. As to the smell, if I can smell dogs, cats, skunks, and the neighbor's barbecue, which is close to their house, why am I not going to smell their chickens? Chickens have an odor. If the chickens were in a different spot, I might not be able to smell them, but that's just the way it is. If I can, and it's kind of at my house. This is my house. It's like the smoke from the fires at night. And during the day, the smoke is fine. During night, the smoke comes in. So you have many issues. I am concerned about the health. When I was on chemotherapy, the first thing they took away from me was rehabbing baby birds for Sierra Wildlife because of the bacteria. Chickens have bacteria. Anyway, by their having chickens, because of where they were located, I was forced to close my windows, and I was forced to stay in my house and turn on air conditioning. So for me, it was a huge impact that people next door had chickens. I can see that another property might not have, but I would like to absolutely know that there was a very direct method that would protect both sides, not just the chickens.
Great. Could I ask you
So
to summarize and finish up? And I'd like to remind everybody, we do have like the typical rule of a 3-minute rule that, a lot of times that's not adequate, so we want to give everybody a chance. But I think you've used a lot of time. Would you like to just summarize?
In summary, I just request that that the chickens not be permitted within the city limits of Placerville. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's TJ. I live here in Placerville. I've been here for about 2 years. I grew up in Oregon and rancher, farming. I don't believe the government really has the right to regulate my food. That being said, I understand that people go way overboard with some of this stuff. So some regulation is necessary. Now, given that, I live here in Placerville, right downtown, but I have 1 acre. My neighbors have 12 acres, 5 acres, and 12 acres. For me to raise chickens, probably not an issue. My closest neighbor is 100 yards from me. So we're zoned R1 6,000, so we can only have 4 chickens. To me, that doesn't make much sense. Having to go through a process of getting a special permit sounds like a lot of overhead without any real defined regulation as to what that permit process is and how I meet those qualifications. So what I'd like to see is actually the city put together a plan to base that upon how much property you have. So 4 chickens may be adequate for a quarter of an acre. For a half acre, maybe a few more. For a full acre or distance based on neighbors from you, having a few more chickens. For me, I want to be able to grow my food. It's not about having pets. Sure, I'd love to be able to butcher chickens on my own property too, but I understand that might be offensive to some people. But they're not my pets, they're food. Just like growing a garden, just like going out turkey hunting, deer hunting, I want to be able to supply food for my family when I want to do it. And I think chickens are an important aspect of that. They're inexpensive, they provide a lot of food for a family very cheaply. So that's really my thought, and I think a lot of people should really consider raising chickens, and the city should actually consider better rules for, based upon the property amount for the residents. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Kristen Lacey. I'm not sure if you can see me.
Can you pull the mic down toward you?
Sure.
There you
sorry.
go. And then
I'm actually moving over here this week. We bought a place, an acre over in Placerville. We're in the city of Placerville, and much of your not knowing about chickens might be coming from people that don't actually know that there could be an ordinance against chickens. I've never lived anywhere that you couldn't have chickens, and I was really disappointed to find out that the city of Placerville doesn't allow that. You're a quintessential Americana town, and chickens have been a very long part of American culture growing up. I grew up with them, we have them now. I'm coming off of rural rescue, and we have 7 horses on our horse farm over there. Chickens do a lot more than just eggs or make noises or any of the other things. The chickens we use them for bug control and pest control, and they go through and they actually get a lot of the pests. This place that we're buying in Placerville is riddled with carpenter ants. It is infested and was almost condemnable. I'm counting on these chickens to be able to go through there so I don't have to use pesticides, which are going to end up in the creek it's running through the property. We also feed our chickens the table scraps that are coming off, and these are things that don't end up in your landfills. They also provide eggs, and my children would say they're like pets. I keep hearing you refer to them being like dogs. Chickens are not like dogs. They're not aggressive. You don't need to be registered. They're not going to come out and bite somebody. You don't have to worry about that. They're a lot like cats, and actually you go out and call the cat comes. You go out and call the chickens come. You talked a lot about coops and some of the things. I hope I can answer some of your questions for you. Coop is a kind of a broad term. There's a roosting box that you have in there, and chickens have a nocturnal instinct to actually just shut down completely. So when the sun is down, the chicken is hiding and is totally quiet, like you hear birds just stop at night. That is their natural instinct. They're in a very small confined area. During the day, you let them out. They're up at sun up, or when you let them out and they go into an area. When you're referring to your coop, you might want to take and consider there's a run-in, and you may have seen this on TV before. This is a screened-in area, and I'm not sure if you're talking about 120 square feet to include that area or not, but that's something you might want to take into consideration. Hens also have a nesting box where they lay their eggs. So those are some of the aspects of a coop. A lot of that's considered a temporary building. I just resigned as president of the HOA for Deer Valley Ranch, and these are a lot of things we took into consideration. We also didn't like unsightly buildings. We wanted to make sure that they were in harmony of the community. We didn't want them made out of OSB. Whether or not they require a permit is whether or not they're a permanent structure, if they have concrete, a lighting conduit, and so forth. But those are some of the things you might want to take into consideration. They're a lot like a cat, and I don't believe you have an ordinance to have registered cats here, and they are a source of backyard food. And you might not understand some of the reason why people don't want to have pesticides in their food or know where the things are coming from or why people buy free range, but there are a lot of people that do.
I think, can I interrupt you just for a second? One or two of the commissioners has a question of you.
I
If
have
we
a
can keep it
question.
kind of brief.
And I certainly wouldn't want to face you in a filibuster. You're no, actually quite good. If we create a chicken advisory group, I want you on that committee. So for 4 chickens, what is the minimum amount of space for the coop that 4 chickens would need?
I would think a 10 by 12 for them to run around, and again.
Oh, no,
your
just,
work-
just the coop itself, not the fenced outdoor area,
their-
just,
Okay, for their nesting?
just the
it's-
nesting component, because
Can you
that's,
step, I'm sorry, can you step a little closer to the mic?
To the
You need to
microphone.
use the mic.
Yes.
so we can hear you and record you.
Some of us up here aren't in our 20s.
I think ours is about 3 feet by 6 feet, and that
18,
allows,
3,
it just allows them to move around. Chickens just nest, they literally only need their body space at night.
okay.
But
But
you
then you're
have
also
to let
talking
them
about,
out.
which the ordinance doesn't contemplate, but we should talk about. You're also saying that outside the nesting area, what we would call the coop, I guess, us chicken novices, there should be a fenced-in area for them to roam around in. If they're not roaming free on the property, they have to at least have that minimum.
And then general rule's gonna be you as an adult or wanna go in there when it's raining and take care
Sure.
of your chickens, and that area is for you and also for them.
Okay.
The larger area they have, the less of a mess, and chickens really don't smell, so, I mean, it's.
Okay, all right, that's very helpful, thank you.
All right, can you sum up? It's been kind of
Sorry,
wild.
just one more thing about storing feed in there. That's also something you wouldn't want to do. Generally, you don't want your feed stored in where your cats or dogs are. They tend to get after it as well, and you don't want the chickens to roost and poop on it. I'm not sure you want to require someone to keep their food inside because that requires them to build a separate building. I myself don't want my chicken feed inside my house, but I do have galvanized locking lids that are near the chicken roosting area. And that's it. I really hope that you guys will consider putting in an ordinance. I think chickens are a very part of your quintessential Americana town. You have an amazing town. We're excited to be here, and I hope chickens will be a part of that for many people. So,
All right.
hens. Sorry, one thing. Hens do make a sound when they're laying an egg. They kind of yell out. It's a very brief sound. It's not early in the morning. Roosters can do very early in the morning. We had a rooster. We got rid of it because it's offensive. 4 chickens isn't very many chickens, and I think someone talked about scaling it up. We're buying an acre.02. It would be really sad to only have 4 chickens. That's our neighbors are getting eggs from us currently. It'd be sad not to be able to share that with them.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I am not going to Kentucky Fried Chicken after this meeting. Anyone else?
My name is Allison Clement, and I live here in Placerville. And I'd just like to say that it's very much in keeping with the rural nature of our community to allow chickens, especially when urban areas like Sacramento and San Francisco allow it, and everybody is trying to be more sustainable. And I think there's a lot of common sense involved here, and just most people want to be a good neighbor. If I were to have chickens, I'd want to ask my neighbors to let me know if the noise became a nuisance, or in terms of storing feed, you worry about animals getting into your garbage, and skunks eat cat food. Cats can get into a garbage can and create a nuisance, but everybody does what we can to keep that from happening because it's more trouble for us as well as the neighbors. And the noise is very minimal. If you have hens, as everybody said, they don't lay eggs early in the morning like roosters crow. And it's, as I agree with everything the young lady just said as well, and I'd really encourage Placerville to be in line with other communities in encouraging this. Oh, also a quick word. Dogs can be much more of a noise nuisance than chickens, in my experience, and also people who don't care about being good neighbors. A lot of people may not clean up after their dogs and cats, and that would create a lot more odor than the small amount that 4 chickens would make. Most people would, if they care enough to have 4 chickens, they will probably care to keep them healthy by cleaning up after them as well as they would any other pets that they would have. So I'd just like to encourage the city to support this.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Jackie No. I live in the city limits, and I support the chickens. I think it's a great thing for our community. I don't think that they're any more nuisance than any other animal. I have the same as a previous speaker. You know, I have skunk, deer, coyotes. Everything comes through the yard. Your neighbors have cats, dogs. I don't see chickens as any more nuisance than anything else that's going on. And I support even having more than 4 chickens. We don't all live right in the city. I have 3/4 of an acre. My chicken coop could be 100 feet from any of my neighbors' houses. And if you have a family of 4, you get 4 chickens a day. That's a pretty skinny breakfast, you know. So they really are a food source, and that should be considered. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, good evening. I think when you're passing laws, you should use the common sense test, that the public should be able to look at a statute and conclude that it makes sense and it's reasonable on its face. And the one you have now is just plain stupid, especially when you hear, I'm sorry, I should have softened that a bit, but when we hear that the legislative history was that a few people decided, this commission, that that Placerville was too urban for them, and you have them all over the place. You can find live chickens you can buy in San Francisco. They're fulsome all over the communities throughout Sacramento and a number of other areas. We just happen to be an area where, and chickens have always been a part of the culture and the history of this community. The Hangtown Fry goes back to the beginning. I've had chickens, known of them all around here all the time. So what do you have? You have 4 documented cases of people not liking them, complaining since 2009, and then you've had maybe a half a dozen persons inquire because they want the law changed. But then what you know is on a massive scale it gets ignored. I don't think you should have laws that invite people to go ahead and ignore them because they just don't make sense. So you go from one bad law to another. If I may, I'll describe some, as briefly as I can, some of the problems you have with what you proposed. Placerville is not like Sacramento and some of the other flatland communities where there's a lot of subdivisions, and they have these nice cookie cutter lots that are rectangular and they're got perfect corners. You can't find those around here, can you? And it's not level. You've got hills and they're just different shapes. So you're going to come up with a design about you're going to place it so many feet from another structure. And again, trying to, in advance, figure out something that's going to apply to all situations. What if you got a big tall fence next to the neighbor's property? That wouldn't be quite the same problem, is it? The other is when you're talking about 4. Why did you come up with 4? Is this some kind of you like even numbers? What if you got your 4-H'ers who decide they're going to have, the family's going to have a hen sit on some of the eggs and wait 30 days and you got a bunch of chickens running around? That's increased your number beyond 4. What do? Call the, for your enforcement people, are going to call the poultry version of Child Protective Services and put in foster homes? I mean, or you go and you get the 2-day-old chicks that they're supposed to be separated by gender, and then you find out 8 months later, a Pulitzer surprise. This is not, you know, it's got a rooster. So it doesn't make sense. I think it would be more sense if you're going to try to put up a law like this, that you look at how much square footage the property has. Somebody has a house and then they own the adjoining vacant lot. So their situation's not quite the same as somebody else who's got a lot that's very small. And when it comes to designing chicken coops, it's amazing because there's a whole books on it. You talk to people who grow chickens, and they have all these unusual designs. So when you're trying to design square footage, I've got one coop now that has a brooding box next to it and then has a run. So I don't know how we're going to define that as, and it's like a condominium, it's departmentalized as the chickens develop. So you're just not going to, it's not a wise law. And this idea of picking up feathers within 24 hours, I mean, it needs a lot more thought. That's the best I can do in 3 minutes.
All right, I think one of the commissioners has a question for you. No, not anymore? All right. That was it. He gave up.
You gave up? I have, for full disclosure, our property has had chickens on the property various times over the course of the last 100 years. We have, we're part in the county and part in the city. So and our chickens don't bother anybody. We go around and ask. I think our chickens have congenital laryngitis or something. But when you're up on the hill, you can actually hear, on the weekends, you can hear the raceway down there a lot louder than anything else.
Yeah. You got a question? All right. All right. Anyone else? Please limit your comments to 90 minutes
I'll try.
or less.
Good evening, Commission. Michael Drobish. Was writing down some ideas you might consider in fleshing out this ordinance. Personally, I do think we should allow the chickens because, after all, if we ban them, then how can we call ourselves the land of the free? They are pretty low impact. I grew up with them my entire life, all kinds of animals. But you do need to have your prescribed controls, so if there becomes a nuisance, there's a way to correct it or revoke it. I would think that a permit is a way to go, and especially it should be inexpensive. I think the number of problems is gonna be low, and you could always revisit it. If it becomes a problem, you can raise the fees. I'd like to know, would this affect apartment complexes? And if so, would it be per parcel, per unit? And you should probably address that. I would think they're considered residential. Another question, is there a uniform building code standard for chicken coops? If we're gonna use the UBC, do they have a standard for chicken coops? And also, I think you should separate the coop from the run. The coop is gonna be roofed. The run typically isn't, it's open air. So calculating your square footage should probably discount the run, but make sure the run still falls within the parameters of the setbacks. On D6, I'd like you to add disposed of off property or in a airtight container, and that a regular garbage can doesn't count as an airtight container. So in a hot summer day, chicken goes in on day 6 and it sits there on the curb for a week. In DG, it says it requires water at the structure, and that's a potential code conflict, unless it's just like stored in a barrel. I would like you to have the ability to allow more chickens per acreage, but maintaining sensible setbacks. I think to practically protect the feed, et cetera, from animals, locking lids. DE, I'd probably prefer to strike out any dwelling unit and just leave the setback to the property line. I think you should allow slaughter. The gentleman that commented that it's similar to gardening. You grow your garden, you raise your garden, you consume it. Very few people are going to go through the trouble of what me and Grandma used to do way back when, but they should have the opportunity. And then the Humane Society is showing square footage required per hen at 4 square feet for roosting, which is kind of excessive. And then 10 square feet of yard run per hen. So you're looking at per hen 14 square feet of coop and run. 4 chickens would be, I guess, 56 square feet. And the historic district structure review, that would be interesting. So just some ideas there, so good luck.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? All right, I will rapidly close the public hearing. Bring it back to the commission, and with the concept that sometimes democracy hurts, but it's a good thing. So we'll open it up for discussion amongst the commission.
Just a question for staff directly, if I may. Because this ordinance says for property use exclusively for residential purposes, does that automatically exclude the apartment buildings? That was a comment that was raised. Or if the answer to that is not entirely, then what do we need to do to make sure that, I presume staff is excluding, these are single-family residential that we're talking about, and we're excluding multifamily residential, but we don't say that specifically.
This ordinance is applying to single-family residential zones. So you're looking at R1, 10,000, or 6,000, 10,000, and 20,000 square feet. As I indicated in my earlier presentation, chickens are allowed any number in the RE, which is the estate residential zone, and also any number of chickens and or roosters in R1A, which is also, those are both single-family residential zones. Actually, the estate residential is an estate, so it is different. That's the one that allows agricultural. You could slaughter in that zone. So a direct answer to the speaker is no, this ordinance does not apply to multifamily residential zones.
Mr. Chairman, I'm passing around some pictures that were taken of my neighbor's coop, if you want to call it that. I am not opposed to having chickens in the city, especially at the small number we're talking about, with the following guidelines. I think the coops must be constructed out in a sound building, using sound building principles. Exterior walls need to be painted. So if if it is seen from someplace else, it is not bare OSB, plywood, or other such materials. The roofing material should match the existing residence or look like a, how do I want to say this, like it was meant to be the right size for the building, not a piece of corrugated steel that is never cut to size. I think that if they are in the, we had somebody talk about both the coop and the run. The coop needs to be more than just sticks put in the ground and chicken wire stretched. I guess that's a proper term, chicken wire stretched between it. It needs to be clean and neat. I would like to see it, the ordinance say that it cannot be within 20 feet of a residence, not necessarily the next door neighbor's residence, but a residence, and 20 foot to the property line. All structures shall not be visible from a public right-of-way, a common drive, or the neighbor's residence. So if you have a chicken coop on the side of your house, you need to provide fencing so that it cannot be seen from the street. I think if we do these kinds of things, it makes it that personal thing. I have a neighbor that has two little Jack Russell Terriers, and you cannot walk on my street without those two Jack Russell Terriers tearing at the fence. You can see them every time they go. I have another neighbor that has on one side a St. Bernard and a Great Dane. They're behind a fence and you wouldn't know they were there. And they're two huge dogs. So if we're going to call it a pet, then it needs to be treated as a personal pet and blocked from the public view. There you go. All right.
Mr. Chairman, I have a comment. Regarding the information that was passed up there, that needs to be part of the public record, so I need that for posterity. Thank you.
All right, I won't lose it.
Well, I think I shared most of my opinions earlier. I do want to say that, in a nutshell, my beef is not with the people who come to the meeting, regardless of their positions, and respect of the community process. I just think this is a wonderful inflection point to get our arms around the criminal chickens. I think it's hugely unfair to the people who are trying to do the right thing and do it in the right way. And of course, as I say, you know, my view is colored because, you know, we had 4-H projects. None of them were meat projects, but my daughter got a great deal of good experiences caring for her chickens. They were straight up pets for her. So I think it's a good idea. I think to those who say it doesn't go far enough, you know, there's nothing preventing us after we've gotten some experience with the numbers we have to revisit this. So if this turns out to be wildly successful, and it does seem likely that some different way of scaling the number of chickens to the available property is appropriate, we can always revisit it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, staff, and for the public has come to discuss this item. So really what we have to struggle with, I believe, is the free use and enjoyment of personal property, and that goes for both the holders of chickens as well as the folks that don't have chickens, and that's really going to be the balance that we have to strike. And we'll try to mitigate, I think, in striking that balance, we'll try to mitigate everything that we possibly can. And then we have to decide here what's reasonable to mitigate and what's really beyond the expectation of mitigation. How can we get to yes? I support folks having chickens in the city limits for the reasons that were stated, and crafting something that will work, that I think is going to require us to take some baby steps, which I think is exactly what staff is proposing this evening. I don't think it's exactly where it needs to be yet, and we're going to try to work through some of that, get a draft if it's approved, and then we can go from there and continue to refine. I would make the observation that not all properties may be suited to chickens 4 or less because of topography, and because it may result in offensive sounds and odors and whatnot, and those are going to have to be handled on a case-by-case basis. And I think, as staff indicated, we are complaint-driven, and I think it's going to have to remain complaint-driven. So if somebody's engaged, and this goes to any activity, frankly, not just the chickens, anyone could be engaged in an activity on their property, and someone can complain based upon noise and odor and lighting. Any of those things could apply. And so I think the same principles need to apply here as well. The things that we have to be concerned with mitigating from my perspective deal with noise, smell, pests, which include both vermin as well as insects. I would suggest that staff may want to consider getting advice from the Ag Department regarding this. The discussion about the size of that's necessary was very helpful to me this evening. I'll make the observation that this ordinance is dealing only with what I will now call the brooding boxes, to separate it from the run, as terms I'm learning this evening. So the coop is the brooding box, and in terms of square footage, that's all we're talking about. I need to ask staff a question. If in staff's opinion, if this were approved, people could have chickens, would there be any restriction on the chickens running free on someone's property? Like say as long as it was fenced. So if it was their backyard, would your view be that those chickens can run free in the backyard of someone's property?
When staff was fashioning the ordinance, and of course reviewing many other ordinances that were prepared by other cities in the state, the coop, at least the way we were defining it, and the way we characterize it in there was the enclosure. So as one of the speakers pointed out, the square footage for where the chickens are going to sleep during the night.
Right.
That is the enclosure.
Right,
So
correct.
we didn't, the run, we have no restrictions or
Right, so
no
let's check during the
development
day, if I understand.
standards to the run. So
Okay.
if somebody had their whole backyard fully fenced, those
That's fine.
chickens can run around the entire backyard. We have no
Okay.
restrictions on that.
Okay,
The
so-
restriction was only on the enclosures.
Okay, all right, so, and that's where I am at. I just want to make sure we had that clarification. So this ordinance isn't talking about defining a run and restrictions there too, and I wouldn't propose that either, so long as it's fenced and the chickens can't get out then onto adjoining properties. So getting into specifics then, the things that I am concerned with still at this point, I am concerned with the visibility, as Commissioner List raised, but at the same time, I'm challenged a little bit about design standards. I'm not aware that we have design standards if somebody wanted to build a shed in their backyard, for example, or if somebody wanted to build a tree house, or if somebody needed to take a tree house down that they partially built, which would be me. But there are no standards for that right now, and I'm wondering, why would we necessarily treat this differently? And I do completely support not having something like this visible from public right away, or whatever you described. I thought the words you used were really good. So I would support that. The concern, though, about having to raise the height of a fence, you run in afoul of what our fencing ordinance is, right? You can't, so you're going to have to figure that out. So visibility is one issue that I have concern with. I would actually I would impose a maximum size. I would impose a maximum size of 40 square foot. That, just based upon the testimony I've heard tonight. That's what I would say. I'd say there has to be a maximum of 40 square foot. Boom. I think the maximum that was offered is just adding for more I can't see why you would need that.
Are you talking about
The coop.
and the run?
No. I think someone puts a brooding box, AKA coop, in their backyard, and those chickens can run all over the backyard if the yard's fenced. I wouldn't put any restriction on that whatsoever. If that becomes a problem because of odors or whatnot, then that's complaint driven, okay? And then you have to go through that remedy process. So, and if this has to come back to us, we can talk about a run restriction, but right now I would say no. I would just leave that alone. So I have concern with visibility. I would specify the square footage at 40 feet. And I don't think I would go to design standards. And so just speaking kind of generally like that, I mean, I can certainly support the ordinance as long as we feel comfortable that we are striking that balance of free use for everyone. I also don't support at this point, since we have to accommodate all properties, and the point was made that, gee, we have a lot of different topography and we're not like a flatlander. That's true for some parts, but that's not true for other parts. And there are a lot of cookie cutter, and even in some of the older neighborhoods, the lots are laid out pretty regular, okay? And it applies. And so we're gonna have to come up with something that reaches out across all. I'm not comfortable yet in creating a graded scale. I think it can always be revisited once we start with, if we were to start with this, then we could revisit it. And I don't support the slaughtering of animals in the city, except as currently allowed, by ordinance. I wouldn't go to that point yet either. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. One is that it's this puts us on this real slippery slope of we're all kind of struggling with design issues and design guidelines for something that otherwise, like many other types of structures, there are no design guidelines. Whether it's the crummy doghouse that your neighbor throws up against the wall, or the goat barn, or whatever, these things that are under 120 square feet that don't have permanent power and water, we don't typically, they're considered basically transient or temporary construction, even though it might be there for 50 years. The same crummy piece of plywood, or MDF in your case. but it is a real issue when we're talking about trying to impose some sort of design guidelines on a type of structure that's really not a whole lot different from a whole lot of other things that we don't regulate, where we could have lengthy public meetings about dog houses and all these other kinds of things, and tree houses, which don't require permits unless they're over 120 square feet. So, I mean, I'm kind of struggling with that a bit, and I think we're going to have some more discussion about the design part of this. I think there's some merit to placing some restrictions if it's viewable from other parcels and from the public right of way, so that we just don't have this proliferation of sort of blighted projects, because that's probably the only place in here where we can really address the real legitimate concerns of the folks that would prefer there wasn't a chicken ordinance, because we have to balance, like Commissioner Friend says, we have to balance everyone's rights. So I think we'll be having some more discussion on that. But I think the good news is that this is just the beginning of a process that will incorporate the public's comments versus ours. So we are going to kick this can down the road a little bit and give staff time to incorporate the comments they've heard from us tonight and from the public, and we'll be having more public hearing on this. And then even when the Planning Commission is ready to take some action at some point in the future, the City Council, they'll be having their public hearings on it. So there's a lot of time, there's a lot of opportunity for us to all kind of get this right as far as everyone's concerned. Okay. All right. Well, I think then.
I do have a comment to make, Mr. Chairman, if I may, just for clarification, and because I heard this issue brought up a couple of times, and Mr. Painter brought to my attention, and this is in regards to our historic districts. And I know I think it was several commissioners that mentioned, well, what about a chicken coop in a historic district? Well, what Mr. Painter pointed out to me is that the city has a very broad definition of what constitutes a structure. So a structure, regardless of size, is basically any structure that has a roof. So it could be it could be a doghouse. We'll just use that as an example. And if you're putting this doghouse in an historic district, and please chime in, it would require site plan review if it's in an historic district. So at least within our current residential historic districts, there would be that design review of the structures greater or less than 120 square feet currently in our code.
Hey, thanks for that clarification, because that puts a lot of things on the table in terms of the commission being able to ensure that the people can have their chickens and yet we maintain our important historical and eat them too. Well, no, they can't eat them. So that's a good thing. Thank you, sir.
Do we in the city provide, I want to, for a better term, a poop sheet on structures, like a storage shed? Do we give out any information on what, the structure of them? Is it the standards? Any kind of standards that we give out? My question is this: would it be possible when we have someone come to the city and say, I want to keep 4 chickens, and we say, yeah, you can keep 4 chickens. Now here, we have these guidelines, and here's the guidelines, and attached to the guidelines are some ideas on how to build a chicken coop instead of 4 pieces of plywood and a piece of tin on the roof. Is that a possibility?
Yes, it is. To answer your first question, no, the city does not have guidelines for construction of a shed. Again, if somebody were to build a storage shed in their backyard and it's less than 120 square feet, it doesn't require a building permit. If it's over 120 square feet, then it does, and they submit the plans, and hopefully it's being built by either a property owner or a contractor that's licensed and understands the building code, and they'll build it per code, they get their permit and they build it. In regards to your second half to your question, I was amazed, as staff was amazed at the wealth of information on the website in terms of the keeping of chickens and the building of coops and runs and the minimum square footages and all that information, very available on the internet. Staff can certainly provide a sheet where we could direct people to those websites. We can also probably print out information that could be available right off the internet. We can just make that available. People come in. We can certainly do that.
I'd like to invite the speaker, I think it was the third speaker, the young lady who had a lot to say about chickens, to offer her expertise to the city to help put something together. And once this ordinance, assuming it were to become approved, that could be on the city's website with some recommendations. So I'll offer just a couple of suggested changes to the ordinance that was presented to us, and if anyone is interested, if that follows to a motion, great. But where I'm at right now is that I would, starting with the development standards 2A, I would, my preference would be that any enclosure or other accessory structure, I'm sorry, I'm no changes to 2A, I'm sorry. Going to 2C, any enclosure shall be a minimum of 25 square feet and a maximum of 40 square feet. So I want to see a maximum in the size. And they would then have to come and get a special use permit for anything larger than that. Okay, that would be my preference. Suitable material. I'm not sure what suitable material means, but I'm going to leave that there. I would change 2E. Any enclosure shall be restricted to the rear yard. I'm not comfortable with the side yards. And I can just think of my own property that's just barely there with my neighbors, and I just wouldn't. So I'm gonna be a little bit more restrictive in this case and say that you can only do this in the rear yard, not in the side yard. And side yards tend to have a lot less ventilation and other things, and things can concentrate there and whatnot. But if they want to do it in the backyard, then that's fine. The other thing that I would do is issue with the visibility. And I would use Commissioner List's language. I thought it was eloquent regarding shall not be visible from public right-of-way, roadway, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a good step. With just, I think, those changes, I think we get to a point where we're really addressing some of the main concerns. Everything else, whether it's noise or whatnot, is going to be dealt with on a complaint-driven basis, which is what our process is already. So, just some thoughts.
Okay, was that really a motion?
No, those would be, if we make a motion, then that would be, that's what I would just offer some
okay.
consideration for. That's not a motion.
All right,
Not
thank
yet.
you.
We can come back.
I had a list of some comments, but a couple of things that keep popping up. One is the visibility issue, and it kind of ties in with the side yard. I live in an area where the vast majority of the fences are chain link. I mean, there are a certain number of dog-eared, wood fences that have no visibility. The vast majority are chain link fences. I don't know of anybody in my neighborhood that currently has chickens, but if they decided to do that, it would be an incredible expense to fence their properties, so that would prevent any sort of visibility issue. The other issue is that I actually live on, and I'm just taking myself as an example, because if I can find one exemption, then there are many. I actually live on two pieces of property. One is a very narrow parcel, probably, I'm going to say 30 feet wide and very, very long. Because of the way the house is situated, there is probably 100 feet between my house and the adjacent property, which would make it the side yard. I'm not planning on raising any chickens, but if I was, I would basically need to put them on that side yard. So I think it's very lot, location, house, location specific, and I don't think we can say, well, we have to have it this way as a general rule, because it'll be 24 hours before somebody comes in and says, you know, this doesn't make sense. I really do want to raise chickens or have chickens, and the way the house, the property, et cetera, is situated, that's not gonna happen. And the last thing is, if I did put solid fencing, that chicken coop, because of the side yard, would still be visible from a public street, public right-of-way, simply because of the elevation of the land. So I understand the reasoning. I just think that if we can find, if we have an example of how that wouldn't work for somebody, or would put them to great inconvenience or expense, then maybe that's not the best way to word that. I did want to take a minute to thank Mr. Drobesh and Mr. Smith and the other members of the public for their comments. Before this evening's meeting, I knew little or nothing about chicken coops, and now I know just a little bit, probably just enough to be dangerous. I did want to welcome the young lady to Placerville and welcome the family to California from Oregon. That was my comment, and I did like your input about the total area of the property and not just the lot itself. That to me, that smacks of common sense, and I do appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to respond to Commissioner Roby, and I really appreciate what you've just brought forth. First, with regards to visibility, in terms of backyard and the chain link fencing, I don't think we were contemplating that at all. If you're in a situation where basically your property is separated by open fencing or chain link fencing, it's open. There's nothing you can do about that. And whether it's a shed or a dog house or a tree house or a chicken coop, it shouldn't matter. Now, having said that, this becomes part of the challenge. And in my earlier comments, I raised the prospect that not all properties may be suited to permitting this activity, and that happens now. Topography limits what people can build, for example, and other things, and it may just be that, well, if your property is situated like this, then you would either, in the case of the side yard, and we'll talk about the side yard separate, but the side yard visibility, it may be, well, you're going to have to put some fencing along that one side to meet the visibility component. So that's really what we have to wrestle with. The side yard aspect that you mentioned is an interesting consideration, and so I guess my remedy would be, I don't like requiring for exception the conditional use permit process. I think that's a little bit too onerous for someone who'd really, my property really suits, the side yard is much more suited to this than my rear yard is, okay? And I don't want someone to necessarily have to go through a conditional use permit because they need that exception as the way it's currently written. I don't know if staff has an alternative suggestion, whether that could be administrative or some other process where it could be reviewed and signed off on without being absolutely prohibitive. I don't have an answer for that one at the moment. So I just don't know. So I would probably still keep with the restriction to the rear yard and not the side yard. Realizing there would be exceptions. And I don't know how to deal with the exceptions. That's my question. I don't know if staff has something they can offer. How do we deal with exceptions in those cases without going through the conditional use permit process?
Just a question for staff in terms of the mechanics of this. It strikes me that we should probably just table this item, allowing the staff to take to heart the comments from the public and us tonight, and then we'll re-agendize it in the future when you're ready. Is that what you expect?
I think what staff is looking for is for the most part, general concurrence. So, for example, the rear yard versus side yard, if you want, if it's the concurrence of the commission where just keep it to the rear yard, you know, maybe just concurrence. I don't think you need to vote on it at this point. Maybe when we come back with our next draft, that's where we will actually be more wordsmithing the code, and you'll be probably taking actions on different changes to be made when we bring it forward then to the council. And so I think at this juncture, we're only looking at for general concurrence.
Okay. So on that specific item of the rear yard versus, or a prohibition against doing it in side yards, can I get some comments for staff?
Well, if I could, can you think of an alternative way for granting exceptions on a case-by-case basis to an otherwise restriction against using the side yard that wouldn't involve the conditional use permit process? What else, what other remedies do we have with that?
When staff was looking at that, just to give a little history, because we thought about that.
Okay.
So when we looked at some of the other codes, and as someone mentioned, one of the speakers mentioned that we don't typically have the more cookie cutter subdivisions that you have in a valley town, because they're flat. So you can have very, it's clear the side yards are probably much smaller than the rear, but up here it's not that way. I think you have a lot of different parcel configurations and where it's been developed upon. So sometimes you can have where the rear yard, at least by definition, could be much bigger than the rear yard, and so we didn't want to exclude that, and so we intentionally put the rear yard and the side yard in there, and we intentionally excluded the front yard because it's the front yard that's been contention not only with chickens but with putting up the high fences and making it in the contractor storage yards and all those other things in the front yard that's visible from the street and from the neighbors. So that was thought out, but that was staff's thinking, and that's why we didn't want to restrict it. So to your second question about is there another avenue, we were having a little sidebar here, Mr. Painter and myself, about, what can we do besides a conditional use permit? So maybe what we could do is, I'm trying to look at the mechanisms. We have our development standards in there, so typically if you're deviating from the development standard, you're going to apply for a variance rather than a conditional use permit. So a conditional use permit, we could have it for an expansion of the use. So if you're only allowed 4 chickens and you wanted 8 chickens, that would be appropriate under a conditional use permit. But if you're looking at deviating from a setback, which is purely a development standard, well, that's going to be a variance process. And I think we want to go through at least those typical planning type of permit applications, because then we afford public input. If you have a neighbor that could be adversely affected because they want to put the chicken use closer to a property line, well then I think we want to make sure we go through a process where we notify the property owners and it's aired out in a public forum, not something where a staff person is checking some boxes and somehow approves it, and then we have some real issues to deal with after that. So again, we're just trying to fashion some basic what we would call performance standards. That's why I was sort of called them performance standards rather than development standards, is sort of so that these are sort of the minimum requirements for the keeping of chickens in these otherwise single-family residential zones that are for single-family use.
Mr. Chairman, I like the variance concept, so I mean, with me, I think that could get us to, I would like to think it could get us to consensus.
Right, and I agree, having been through that process, kind of on both sides. Anybody else? Okay, then I guess I don't think we need any formal action here. We'll just table the motion and re-agendize it, ask staff to re-agendize it when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We also want to thank the audience. There were a lot of experts out there, and if there's anybody in the audience that has any particular expertise or they could assist staff, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not gonna crow about how well we handled that.
Just a question. So, just for the benefit of the audience, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
through the chair to staff, any idea when staff could anticipate this would be coming back to commission?
We don't anticipate we're going to be able to bring it back at your next commission meeting. Therefore, we're probably looking at least a month
Okay.
to go through and do this right.
October, November?
So probably November, and it'll
Okay.
be, and we'll advertise, and it'll be an agendized item.
Okay. Thank you.
So you're not continuing it to a date certain.
Right. So the wheels grind slow, but they grind fine, so.
Yeah, well, at least we feel somewhat confident, at least we have a good skeletal ordinance to work with, and
They'll be cooped up working on it. Okay, moving along. Moving along on tonight's agenda, we still now move on to matters from commissioners and staff. Commission have any items for sharing? Nope. Moving on to staff comments.
Staff has no items tonight.
Do we anticipate a meeting in 2 weeks?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Good night. Okay, is there probably consensus that we'll adjourn?
Motion.
Oh yeah, we have to have a motion. Yeah, signify by saying let's go home. All right, thank you.